A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Marina Lounge. Our first speaker in our speaker series is an emeritus professor of California State University, Fresno, where he taught for 41 years, and a registered professional archaeologist. He spent many years living in Peru, leading archaeological projects and teaching at the country's top university. He worked on Peruvian geography, archaeology, and history, has been widely published, including in Encyclopedia Britannica. Since retiring, Dr. Cruz has led numerous tours to Peru for institutions such as the Smithsonian and the Archaeological Institute of America. He has lectured aboard ships throughout South America, Mexico, Central America, and the Panama Canal. He and his wife now run a horse ranch in California. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Dr. James Cruz.
Thank you, Devin. I want to follow up what he just said, a little bit more of my background. I grew up in northeastern Ohio. I went to Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. Some of you may know it as Case Western Reserve, but it was Western Reserve when I went there. I got a degree in history, then I went to Michigan State for a master's in geography, and then to UCLA for a PhD in geography. When I went to UCLA, they did not have an archaeology PhD, and if you were interested in archaeology, you could go in geography, anthropology, history, classics, and do your studies. I was in geography. I actually took more courses in archaeology than in geography when I was at UCLA. And just about when I was finishing, they developed a PhD in archaeology, and my advisor, one of my advisors said, do you want to be the first UCLA archaeology degree? All you'd have to do is take a couple more required courses. And I was already 2 years into teaching at Fresno State, and I said, I'll just take my geography degree, and rather than go back to UCLA for another year. So my degree is in geography, but I am a registered professional archaeologist. For the first 15 years after getting my degree, I spent a lot of time in Peru, did archaeology there. When I returned to Peru after several years in Peru in the early 80s, I had a friend that said, do you want to start doing some California archaeology? And I said, I'm really not interested in that. I'm a Peruvian archaeologist. And he said, I've got a big project and you could be working with me on it. I said, I'm really not interested. He said, you would be doing the accounting and administrative stuff and I'll do the field work. I said, I'm really not interested. He said, our budget's about $1 million. I said, where do I sign? And so in the late 80s and the 90s, I did a lot of California archaeology, several big projects for various agencies. And then in 2004, I had a project that I was doing for the Federal Bureau of Reclamation, which was not an archaeology project. It was something totally different. And I did that one for 7 years. Again, we had a real big budget. And at the end of the 7 years, I retired from Fresno State and been leading tours to Peru, and in the last 12, 13 years, lecturing on cruise ships. I'm going to do a variety of lectures. The first 4 are going to be on history in Brazil. Tomorrow we'll have one on some of the early booms, and have a second one on booms. We have one on slavery in Brazil. As we start up the Amazon, I have one on a stop that we're going to make called Parintins. And the only shore excursion there is for a fiesta festival that they have. And I'll talk about that one. When you go to that festival thing, there is a person narrating, but they are so soft-spoken and the speaker system is so bad that most people don't have a clue of what has been said. So I'll try to give you a background for that one. And then as we go out towards the Caribbean, I've got a lecture on Columbus, the early Spanish in the Caribbean, and then the last several lectures are going to be on Peruvian archaeology. So, but today, colonial conflicts.
Your Holiness, the little matter that brought me here to the furthest edge of your light on earth is now settled. And the Indians are once more free to be enslaved by the Spanish and Portuguese settlers.
That's the movie trailer for the movie The Mission, Academy Award-winning movie. Some of you may remember. It was in the past available on the TV here. I checked this morning. It is not on the list of movies that you can watch on here. But in the past, if you have a chance to see, if you don't know the movie, it's available on YouTube. A great movie, and it's about the subject of today's lecture. The map here is a simple one, has two vertical lines on there. The darker one on the left is dated 1492, and the one on the right is 1494 on the left. This is the division of the world between the Portuguese and the Spanish, areas that they could conquer, that they could explore, that they could exploit. And it's interesting that at that point in time, 1493, 1494, Portugal was the much more dominant sailing nation than Spanish. And so based on some discoveries, they actually moved the line where it was originally in 1493 a little bit farther west. But that line, the Treaty of Tordesillas line, is what gives Portugal a portion of South America. And the treaty does exist. If you're ever in Spain, and 2 years ago, a couple days ago, for the 16th of March of 2024, I was on Marina. I was going from Miami to Barcelona, and we stopped in Cadiz. I did a shore excursion and went up to Sevilla, and in the Archive of the Indias in Sevilla, there is the original Treaty of Tordesillas, but that's the line that gives that gives Portuguese a big part of South America. Talking about early settlement in Brazil, in the first decade or so after Treaty of Tordesillas, there were a number of ships that sailed along the coast of what is today Brazil. Some Spanish, some Portuguese, some accidental. The Portuguese were mainly trying to get around Africa and get to India and the Spice Islands, Indonesia area. But if they were blown farther to the west than what they had anticipated, they ended up touching on Brazil. Settlement began in what were called capitanias. in Portuguese explorations along the coast of Africa, they had set up a few little colonies, particularly in the Cape Verde Islands that the Portuguese had claimed and occupied. And these capitanias were a designation of land to a rich family in Portugal that then would be responsible for settling and administrating and taking the benefit from that territory. And that's what was going on in this area. Right there is about Capitanias. The area that we'll be stopping at day after tomorrow, Recife, it's called, the general name for it is Pernambuco. That was the area of earliest settlement. In the area around Recife, they quickly settled on sugarcane as the major crop that they were going to be using. I'll talk more about sugar and sugarcane tomorrow. And they initially were using black slaves. They started out using the local Indians, but the local Indians in Pernambuco fled it farther into the interior, and so they started to use black slaves. I have a lecture coming up on slavery in Brazil. Expanded south in the middle 1500s, down towards Sao Paulo, and ultimately to Rio de Janeiro, where we were yesterday. And then it scattered settlements. Not very many people, European people, and most of the Portuguese that came over were men. Again, in the lecture talking about slavery, we'll have to deal with masters and slaves and the relations between them. For a period of time, the Dutch occupied Pernambuco. They came in, invaded, took over. There were a couple of important results of that. One is that the Dutch introduced new technology into the sugar industry, better milling machines and so forth. But also, in trying to kick the Dutch out, the Portuguese got more united. Where they hadn't been united, they were a series of little capitanias, and now they had to be working together to get the Dutch out. The Dutch were ultimately forced out of the area along the north coast there, but ended up farther along the coast of South America, what became Dutch Guiana, and later today the country of Suriname. So that area down there is the Portuguese colony in the early 1700s, and there's our Dutch colony. Again, the Dutch colony was moved farther to the northwest, what is today Suriname. And also on this map, the area in purple there is the sugar raising area in Pernambuco, and the area in green is a mixed agricultural area down more towards Rio and ultimately down towards Sao Paulo. The word bandera in Spanish or in Portuguese means flag. And a person who carries the flag, who waves the flag, is a bandeirante, okay? During the period that we call in Iberia, for both Spain and Portugal, when they were kicking out the Islamic peoples, the Moorish peoples, what we call the Reconquista, groups of Portuguese soldiers were called bandierantes, these flag wavers that were fighting the Moors and ultimately creating an independent Portugal. In colonial Brazil, the same term, bandeirante, is used to refer to people that went into the interior from the coastal areas looking for Indians to enslave, and also looking for anything else they could find, anything worthwhile finding. And again, in a lecture tomorrow, I'll be talking about diamonds and gold as one of the things that the bandeirantes were finding. So the local population in the northeast had fled into the interior. In the area in the south, that area that was green on the previous map, the Indians were much more pacified, they were more settled, they were agriculturalists, and so in south central Brazil, the bandeirantes could go into the interior and literally attack and capture a whole village and take them back to the coast and enslave them. A bandeirante group typically had a couple of Europeans, Portuguese, as the leaders, a group of mixed blood people from the early mixing of Portuguese and Indians or blacks, and then some Native Americans that were allied with the bandeirantes. And these were large groups. They were groups as much as 1,000 people sometimes. And they would go in exploring and going into the interior for as long as 2 or 3 or even 4 years. In fact, they would go so far as to move into the interior, set up a place and grow crops, wait till the crops could be harvested, and then they would move farther into the interior for another 4 or 6 months, and again settle someplace and raise crops, always looking for Indian settlements and always exploring to see what they could find. So these are just some paintings that I found on the web of banderiante groups enslaving the Indians, working their way into the interior. There are a number of pretty famous banderiante leaders. This guy, Antonio Tavares, was active for about 15 years, and there he is. In one expedition, he supposedly brought Indians from about 20 villages to the coastal area and then was selling them to some of the farmers. Captured thousands of Indians on that particular voyage or that particular expedition. One of his expeditions went so far as to go all the way to the Andes Mountains in what is today Bolivia and Ecuador and Peru. And here's a map showing his expedition, and it's that line there that this is this 4-year expedition, 4 or 5-year expedition that started out in the Sao Paulo area, south of Rio, and worked its way all the way to near the mouth of the Amazon River. But again, that one touched on the Andes and the area that had been the Incas. Other groups were important for finding gold and diamonds. That'll be our story next time. And they're starting out again in Sao Paulo or Rio and exploring the interior in that area. Comes to be called the Minas Gerais, the general mining area. And this painting is simply banderiantes on their ways to the mines. Another one of the famous ones is this guy, Domingos Velho. He captured a village, most famous for. There were villages of escaped black slaves in the interior of Pernambuco and a little bit in the interior farther south. And some of these villages of escaped black slaves or Indians had been there for as much as a century or more and had more than 10,000 people living in them. These were escaped slave villages. And he led a very famous expedition that rounded those people up, and they captured the leader of that group. And unfortunately, we're not stopping in Salvador. If we'd stopped in Salvador, we would have seen a very nice statue of the leader of the village that he attacked, because he's that one mixed blood black slave, former black slave, is famous throughout Brazil and throughout northern Brazil, northeastern Brazil. They actually have a special day honoring him. It's a big, not a national holiday, but a regional holiday for when he captured that guy. One of the other things they did is they attacked the Jesuit missions. And that movie with Robert De Niro and Jeremy Irons, The Mission, is about the Portuguese attacking the Spanish missions. This is banderiantes attacking one of the missions. You can see the church there in the background. There are a lot of conflicts between the banderiantes and the Jesuits. One of the things that happened was that the banderiantes went beyond the Treaty of Tordesillas lines. And if you see the line of Tordesillas and you see how Brazil is, how big it is today, and you wonder how did they get that big, well, it was the banderiantes that extended the limits of Brazil to the west of the Treaty of Tordesillas line. They were first recognized in 1750 in a treaty between Portugal and Portugal and Spain. And then one of the other things that was happening here related to the Jesuit missions is that the Portuguese king was complaining about the Jesuits actually creating armies of the local Indians at their missions, and ultimately got the Jesuits kicked out of South America in 1767. So let's go back away from the Portuguese. Let's talk about the Spanish, the missions. This is an early map of Peru, and I point out where Lake Titicaca is because in one of the next maps I'll point out where Lake Titicaca is again. But this is the area of what is today basically Peru and Ecuador and Colombia. With the original conquerors of Peru, with Pizarro at Cajamarca when he captured the Incas and essentially took control of the Inca Empire, there were priests with him, mainly Franciscans and Dominicans. And in the early years of the Spanish conquest of the Andes of Peru, it was basically the Franciscans and Dominicans that were out trying to convert the local Indians. Jesuits are a latecomer. They weren't founded until 1540 by Ignatius de Loyola and some of his friends. And so in terms of going to the New World, they were latecomers. And the only places that were left for the Jesuits were the far edges of the Spanish colonial empire. For example, in North America, far northwestern Mexico, in Sonora, Baja California in Mexico. In South America, they got the area on the southeastern corner of the Spanish territory in what is today eastern Bolivia and northwestern Argentina. So the first Jesuit missions were in the far northwest. They concentrated on raising food, particularly corn and wheat, and also raising mules and horses and cattle. And they were down in the lowlands of northwestern Argentina, and they could take that food and sell it and make money for their missions up on the plateau, the Altiplano, where their Spanish had found some very big mines, particularly the silver mines at Potosí. So the Jesuits in the far northwest were fairly successful. Again, there's that same map. You see where Lake Titicaca is. And on this map, there's Lake Titicaca. The area that we're going to be talking about is kind of dead center on this particular map, about right there. The Indians in that area were not Incas. They were not part of the Inca Empire. They are what are referred to as the Guarani. They spoke a language called Tupi-Guarani, and they still exist in fairly large numbers in particularly Paraguay, but a little bit in Argentina, and a little bit of Brazil. In Paraguay, there are still today radio stations and newspapers that are in the Guarani language. It's a very common language in Paraguay today. So, talk about the Jesuit missions to the Guarani. In 1609, they were asked by the Spanish governor of what is today Paraguay to come and set up some missions. The first mission was in what is today Paraguay, San Ignacio Huasu. Obviously, the name San Ignacio is for St. Ignatius, the founder of the Jesuit order, and Huasu means the great mission. They ultimately established about 40 missions. It's a little bit difficult to tell how many missions they established because some were combined, some existed for only a very short period of time. Most of them moved at least once or twice in their history. But they were all along what is today the border between Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina, particularly along the Paraná River. They were moved many times. Oftentimes, the reason for moving them was the bandierante attacks. And ultimately, the Jesuits did build armies out of the Guarani. They had Guarani cavalry. They had the weapons that they had made there and trying to resist the bandierantes. And that's one of the reasons why the Jesuits were ultimately kicked out of South America. 5 of the missions are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. There's one in Paraguay, San Ignacio Huasu. There's one in Brazil, and 3 of them are in Argentina. I'm going to talk about the ones in Argentina. I have not been to the ones in Paraguay or in Brazil. I have been to that area, but I just didn't go to those missions. So you can see where Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil are. And the Jesuit missions are right in the triangle area where the 3 countries come together today along the Paraná River. On this map, you can see locations of some of the missions, and it's a little hard to see, but I'm going to talk about one called Loreto, and the second one I'm going to talk is nearby called Santa Ana, and the third one I'm going to talk about is San Ignacio Mini. We'll take them 3 in order: Loreto, Santa Ana, and San Ignacio Mini. First couple of slides here just to give you a sense of what the area looks like. It's a flat land. It has what's called red earth, it's an old volcanic soil. The missions all looked the same. They had a standard pattern. They would have a square in the middle. The church would face that square. Around the square would be workshops for the Guarani and also residences. And the residences would be divided into young unmarried males, young unmarried females, and then families. But you look at various maps, they all have basically the same pattern. Usually next to the church is a cloister, and also near the church would be a cemetery. So you can see where the Paraná River is there. It's one of the big rivers in northern Argentina. In fact, the biggest river in northern Argentina. And the town in the area, the biggest city in the area is Posadas. And there's where Mission Loreto is. These are Google Earth images. And there's where Mission Loreto is, not too far from the river. This is actually not the original location. It's had moved to there. So there's the river, and there's the mission where it is today. And this one was founded in 1610, one of the early ones. It moved close to the river in 1631. One of the things that distinguishes this place is that it may have had the earliest printing press in the Western Hemisphere. Supposedly, the Jesuits taught them to read. They taught them Western music, built instruments. The story on the mission, part of the story is them making violins and making an oboe, and the soundtrack for that movie is famous. It's beautiful music. So here's Mission Loreto. There's not much there today. As an archaeologist, I always say when you look at a place like this, you need to think, has it been excavated? Has it been reconstructed? Has it been stabilized? Is it the way it was back when, before anybody started doing any work there? And this place is pretty much the way it was. Some of the walls have been stabilized. You can see some boards there holding up some of the walls, but not too much there. The second one I'm going to show you is Mission Santa Ana. And again, there's not much there. I've been to this one twice, and this one was found in 1632. It moved in 1660 because of bandierantes attacks, and it was destroyed during the Wars of the Independence. But it is one of the ones, one of the three that is a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Argentina. And again, it's not in great shape, although the church is fairly decent. This is actually a chapel. You can see the line of what the roof would have been by the line of bricks there on the top left. And this is looking towards the church. And it would have had a pretty big church. This was to the priest quarters, the steps leading up into the priest quarters. These were workshops. And then one of the things I really like about Santa Ana is the cemetery. And this is the cemetery. And we're just panning around the cemetery. What's especially interesting about the cemetery is if we zoom in on some of the graves, these are not from the period of time of the Jesuit mission, but if we start to look at that one, for example, Diomar Krieger, buried there in 1962, and here's another one of the Kriegers, and there's another Krieger, and somebody by the name of Arndt. These are all Germans post-World War II that settled in this area and started using the Santa Ana Cemetery. And Today, they would not be able to do that because as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, you would not be able to put new graves into the old cemetery. But to me, it's fascinating that the local people then turned it into a German cemetery. All right, we've looked at two, Moleto and Santa Ana. The third one we want to look at is San Ignacio Mini. One thing you might notice is they're about a day's walk apart back in the 1800s. San Ignacio Mini is also one of the ones that is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's right in the middle of a local town. It was founded in 1610. It's one of the early ones. It was moved twice and ended up where it is today in 1696. It's called Mini to distinguish it from the San Ignacio Huasu on the other side of the river in what is today Paraguay. This is the great, the other one is the great, this one is the smaller, supposedly, although it's really the best preserved of all of the Argentine missions. It was abandoned when the Jesuits were kicked out. It was largely damaged during the Wars of Independence. And it's one that has been restored to a large extent, beginning in the 1940s and continuous up to the present time. So it does have the sign here as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And this is a little bit closer Google Earth image. It's right in the middle of a town today. It has a very nice little museum. And in the excavations, they found this statue of San Augustine and here a statue of San Ambrosio. Both of those were wooden statues. Here's an adobe brick with somebody's footprints, probably Guarani. And here's a model of the center part of the mission. And here's walking into the mission, heading towards the plaza, coming up on the plaza. And we're just looking around. Those are the workshops there on the side. And then the cloisters and the church farther over. These are some of the houses where the Guarani lived. In reasonable shape. Those again, workshops, and the sign for the workshops. The signs here in Spanish, English, and Portuguese. These are workshops. And then over here, the cloisters, where the priests lived. Typically, each mission would have 2 or 3 priests, a few Spanish soldiers, and then everybody else was Guarani or mixed blood. This is part of the church, or actually leading into the cloisters. There's my wife leading into the cloisters. And part of this is in beautiful shape. But again, part of it has been reconstructed. This now is the church. And we compare that to what it supposedly looked like. All the stonework, all the carving, sculpture work, and so forth was done by the Guarani. This is what the entrance would have been. The balcony above the front door was where the priest would stand to give the Mass with all the Indians out in the plaza out in front. Here's an old 1940 photograph of the same thing that we've just been looking at, that front entrance. It's been restored a little bit, but not too much. Here we're inside the church and been reconstructed a bit. This is all inside the church. Now, There is another reason why one might go up to this area. Again, I've been up there 3 different times or 4 different times, once to Paraguay, once to Brazil, and I think 3 times on the Argentine side. Some of you may have gone up to this area, and if you were here, you may not have seen any of the missions. What you might have done is come up here for Iguazu Falls. Any of you get to Iguazu Falls? If you started out in Buenos Aires, maybe went up there ahead of time or whatever, fantastic spot. If you haven't ever been to this area, worthwhile just going for Iguazu Falls if you don't make it to the missions. Here you can see again in this image, Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina. And there's where Iguazu falls on the Iguazu River, which is a tributary of the Paraná River. The Paraná River is on the left side of the screen. This is Google Earth image looking down on the falls. It's one of the great waterfalls, Victoria Falls, Niagara Falls, Iguazu Falls, among the greatest falls in the world. I took this picture out of the window of a plane. We were flying up one time to Iguazu on the Argentine side. And I took this picture looking out at the hotel on the Brazilian side as we were landing. And I took this one on the Argentine side. There's 2 big hotels, Argentine and Brazilian sides. Most of these are my pictures. All of these are going to be my pictures here, sometimes down at river level. This is one of the little tributaries of the Iguazu River leading up to the falls. There's my wife. Falls are in a big, big horseshoe. And absolutely spectacular. This was from the Brazilian side, and this was from the Argentine side. If you go there, you can get down onto the river and take a boat right up to the edge of the falls. You can see a boat right in the center there, or here. And if you do take that boat, prepare to get wet, because they go right up to the edge of the falls. We've done that once. This is just before the falls, leading up to the falls. And these next group of photos, twice I have flown in a helicopter over the falls. And so these are my helicopter shots of the falls. You're out the window of the helicopter. This is back at, these pictures were from 1985, 40-some years ago, and using film cameras, not digital cameras. On one of the flights, we were in the helicopter for about 10 minutes, and I shot 8 rolls of film. I had 2 cameras. I was handing a camera to my wife. She would reload it. I would shoot, and we were just shooting and shooting away. We got some spectacular pictures of the falls from the helicopter. You might notice the bottom left corner, there's a walkway on the Argentine side that you can go right out to what they call the garganta, the neck or the throat of the falls. And you can see right there, there's a couple viewing platforms that you get out there, be right at the center of the falls. Again, on the right-hand side there, you can see the walkway that leads all the way out to what they call La Garganta. Looking down from the helicopter, or this is the view from the Garganta. The thing that you don't get any kind of an impression of here is the noise. Of course, in that trailer to the mission that I started with, what you were seeing was the priest tied to a cross being sent over the waterfalls there, supposedly. But there's the view from the Garganta. This one is from the Brazilian side. And there's me on that viewing platform. Again, I will have most of my lectures, I think, at 3 o'clock. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock, we'll have the first of the 2 boom lectures, Sugar, Diamonds, and Gold, 3 o'clock tomorrow. Hopefully see you then. If you have questions, I'm going to pick up my computer and go to the back of the room because we have another lecture coming in almost immediately. So hopefully see you tomorrow. Thanks a lot.